So with that in mind, let's now go back and do some more refactoring in here so that we can set it up for unit testing as well. And this is what we should be doing anyway as a best practice. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is actually create an instance of a HTTP client here. And that is going to be a pointer to HTTP client, or a reference to the HTTP client here. So this client, if I just go over it, it's basically, as it says here, it's a transfer mechanism. So it's got a few more properties in it. All right, you can configure a timeout, for example, if you're dealing with a long-running request. But anyways, this client has got exact same methods that we have with the default client. For example, the one that we're really interested in is in the do. But instead of the default client, we want to use our client's do method so that we can easily use it across all the functions, and then it's easier to mock it, right? We can just pass in a mock client for it. And we'll look at that in a sec. The next thing we also want to do is we want to create a variable, let's say API base URL. And for that, we want to extract a path of it. So this is pretty common. That's being used. This is our main server address, you can say. And the rest is just a path that we want to hit in the server. So you're going to go and copy that as a string into this variable, right? The reason I'm doing that is one fundamental thing when it comes to mocking HTTP requests and working with them in a unit test within Go, is that you want to be able to pass in a mock client and you want to be able to pass in a mock server URL pretty easily, right? Because you don't want to be actually sending a request to github.com's api.github.com when you're running unit test, because you don't care about the response actually coming back from there, right? So instead you just use a mock server, which is running up locally, and you just tell the server what you want to be returned as a response, so that that response gets passed through the rest of your code. So in our case, for example, right, so if we look at get files content, right, whatever the response we get back in here from this common request, we just want to make sure that gets passed into the rest of the code, and the return, which is a string version of this data, that's what I want to actually test against and confirm that I'm receiving what I should be getting or not. And yeah, these two things, if we can make them a constant or a variable like this, it will make things a bit more easy. Now that does mean that if we need to pass them in dynamically, we need to pass them in as inputs to our function. So let's go in and create a couple more new input parameters, and let's say we call this client in here, which is http.client, and we'll actually go ahead and do this for the rest of our functions too. So we'll do it in here, and we will also do it in here. We don't need to do this in here because we're not dealing with any URL in this particular instance. Oh, actually, we do need to do this in here. Yeah, because we're dealing with the... Well, since we're using the URL, we can pass that in. We're not worried about that, but we do need the client to be passed in here as well. Because this is the client, so instead of default client, we want to use the HTTP client, right? Okay. And now we are also just going to go ahead and, because you can see we need to pass them into our functions as well. So since we are expecting new parameters, we should start from here. So we're going to pass in our client, and we're going to pass in our API base URL first, and then we're going to pass in our client. copy this over, do the exact same thing for these functions. Also do the same for the post. And then we have got the command request, which we're doing in here. We just need to pass the client right to it. And we also need to pass the client over here. Oop. So now we are ready to actually run our unit test, or actually start writing our unit test, excuse me. So let's go ahead, close this, and we are going to actually, let's make sure that the app is running and everything, which would be a good shout to do. So let's go ahead and run it, just to confirm that we haven't really missed anything. I'm going to now go in and close the pull request, and let's say I'll just reopen it. Should go through the flow, and we should now, in the debug console, get something back. Of course, it's not going to I should have also changed this bit. Okay, I don't think this is actually going to, we haven't really done it as we should. So maybe I also need to look at something else. Okay, first of all, you can see that I'm not actually using them. So I put them in my functions fine, but I haven't actually updated to use it. So that's probably why the issues are happening. And we actually didn't see anything happen. But let's just say person S, and we want to pass in our base URL. In here. And then we also want to do the same for all of these. Should just be %s, and we just want to use API base URL. That way we can pass in, a custom server URL, which we will need to during the unit test, and that would get formatted fine. And here as well, let's get rid of this %s. We're going to do exact same thing. Now we've got a client to use. So instead of the default client, we're going to get rid of that, and we're just going to do client, which is the client that's being passed into the function. And we're just also going to do the same thing in this command request, where we are passing in the client. Okay, now everything else should just be fine. So let's go ahead and run it again. So I'm going to go back to the pull request, close it. Oh, I have actually go and reopen the pull request. Yep. There you go, some activity now finally going on. And the comment should have gone through fine in here. Okay, cool. So now we can say that refactoring is working fine. And we can just delete it for now. Or we can leave it actually. Doesn't really matter too much. Right, so now that it's all working, with the little bit of refactoring that we did, we can actually go ahead and create a new test file. So when you're writing unit test, you want to make sure, if you're doing it in a sub package like this, you have to make sure you're doing it in the same folder as it. The reason you want to do that is so that it's easy to access all the other functions that you have got in that package. You can of course create a separate package for the test as well, but normally it is completely fine to write it within the same sub package, just for convenience. Really, there is nothing wrong with it. So first thing you want to do here, similar to others, you just call it the same package, right? And we are going to be looking at. So first we're going to start to the unit test for this get files method, and then we are also going to be looking at the post function in here. And I'll walk you through. It's very similar. It's going to be the unit testing of both of them. It's going to be the same mocks that we use for the server that we can reuse for both of the cases. But I just wanted to touch, since one is a get, one is a post, just to show how we could assert the responses or assert the expected data from both of these separately. So let's go ahead and jump right onto that. So first thing we want to do is create a function that we want to use. So first we're looking at test get files. Now you don't need to call it get files. I'm calling it get files because by convention you want to make the name for the test function relevant to what you're actually testing in your source code, right? So I'm testing the get files method, so I just called it test get files. And for every test cases in Go, you want to pass it testing.ttype. Now that gets imported from the testing library. Now what is this testing.ttype? This testing.ttype basically it helps to manage the state of the tests that you run within Golang, and also allows you to format if there are any error messages and things like that, or log statements. You could use the t-type to actually generate those logs. In our case, we probably won't be using the t to actually log anything, but we'll see. What is the issue here? Okay, yeah, because we haven't written anything yet. So first thing we want to do is, let's say, what is going to be our mock data, right? Let's define some mock data. So just to remind ourselves what the getFile function is actually doing. It's sending a request to this particular endpoint in the GitHub API, and it's expecting a list or an array of files coming back. Now, array of file is basically a type containing a file name and raw URL. So here I'm expecting an array of objects with the information file name and raw URL. And that's what we need to now supply as our mock response. So our mock data in this case is just going to be, so we know it's going to be an array of file, and we know that it needs to be an object with the properties file name. So let's say main.go, just to keep it similar to what you would expect in reality. Raw URL, you could put whatever you want really. I'm just going to put https because it doesn't really matter too much since it's all mock data. Now this is the mock data, and another way to basically remember what to return or what your mock should be is look at what the return is. So in my case, the return is an array of file from this function getFiles, which is what I want to return as the mock response. Now, mock data is not what you are actually going to be getting the response back as. The response is going to be if you remember, what we're really mocking here is the response that's happening, or whatever we're getting back as body from the command request, right? So, or essentially, what we're getting back here as resp, that's what we're mocking. We're mocking the functionality of what this do function for the HTTP client returns. And that's what then gets passed on to the remainder of the source code, and that will generate, in our case, the array of files. So mock response, and so we need to do encoding of this data into JSON. So let's do JSON Marshall, and we're just going to pass our mock data. All right, so this is now going to take this file array, it's going to take this file slice, and it's going to then encode it into JSON format basically. And we are then also going to set up an important piece of this unit test, which is the HTTP server. So this is the mock or a test HTTP server, which comes from the HTTP test library within Go. There is a function called new server, and what this new server takes in is it basically is expecting an HTTP handler function. Sometimes VS Code, my machine here is slow, but anyways, I wanted to show what it's expecting, but we'll come back to that. So what we need is a thing called a handler func, right? So handler func is, we've seen that in the first video very briefly, but this is slightly different. Handler func essentially takes in your a writer object, so a HTTP response writer, which is what you use to actually decide what your response is gonna be, and then you actually pass in the request that you're dealing with. So in this unit test case is going to be intercepting the request that I'm actually trying to send, and instead of sending it to the real endpoint of github.com, it's going to be sending it to the custom URL of this server, right? So what this takes is writer, which is a function of type HTTP, which is an argument of type response writer, and we're also going to pass in request, which is type HTTP request. And I'm also then going to be defining this function, which is going to be here. So here I'm just actually now going to be defining the body of this function that I'm passing in. You can do this separately if you want to, but it's going to be pretty short, so it doesn't really make much difference, because we're literally going to be doing writer dot write, and we're just going to be passing our mock response in. Now this is going to make sure that the server is going to be always returning this mock response. Now we need to just actually interact with this server. So, but before we do that, let's set up our mock client, which comes from the server itself. So we do server.client. This will return a client that's configured to interact with this test server only. So it's not going to actually interact with any other server, like an external GitHub server. Then I've got writer, and the writer is just going to be, again, we don't want to use the response writer or create an instance of it, but we want to use the drop-in replacement, which is called the new recorder. So a new recorder is literally a drop-in replacement for HTTP response writer. HTTP response writer, you can't really use it for unit testing, but HTTP tests library's new recorder is literally mimics the functionalities of it, and you can use that for mocking a response writer. And lastly, we're going to be deferring the server.close, just so that we make sure we clean up the connections from the server once the test case passes or completes. And now we are actually going to be going and calling our source code or the source function. So in this case, I'm just skipping the error. I don't really want to be dealing with it, mainly because this is a unit test, and I know I should be getting my response back fine if the test server is working. But if you want to do error handling, go for it. You could replace this with error, and just make your test more robust. But for the purpose of this demo, it's not really that important, because we've gone through error handling as part of this series anyway. So we're now going to be replacing this API-based URL with the URL that's coming from our server. And then for the client, we're going to pass in the mock client that we set up, which is coming from the server too. For full name, just pass in any full name. Again, none of these parameters really matter, because we are not really getting anything back. Token, some token, and then we're just going to be passing in the mock writer. And now we just want to be able to assert that. Let's do assert equals. So assert is not a built-in library. We need to actually use go get to get the package for it. and then we can actually execute it. But what we're trying to do is that we know that we're passing in this as our mock response, and we want to be able to, oh, missing a comma here, and we want to be able to make sure that, oops, apologies, missed that there, our file name is equal to main.go. That's what we need to basically check. So files, and we know that we only got one item, so we can just do this, and we can just do file name. So the file name of the first item of this files array that we're getting back should be equal to main.go. That's our expectation. And the T is again nothing but this testing type we're passing in, so that it can, handle, manage a running of this test and actually making sure that it can compare whether the test has failed or passed and return that response back to you. And there it is. We just go ahead and run it after we do a go get on it. So let's go copy this, and let's go clear this off, and we're just going to do go get. Right, so now this should be ready to go in order for us to be actually run the test. And so if you install the Go extension and watch through the debugging chapter in the first video in this series, where I did miss it initially, but I did put a section at the end where I demonstrated how to go and set up Delve, and that's an important tool for debugging in Go. So if you've got the extension and Delve set up, you should also see this utility showing up for you if you're using VS Code. Now, and this is super handy, the debugging and run test, and I will walk you through how this actual test is running and how these mocks are working as part of it, right? So let's go ahead and let's just click on the debug test, right? Let's just walk through it from the very beginning. And we're also going to go and hit a debug point in here, just in case we want to fast forward it. So this, very simple. Let's go look at mock response. So mock response basically is JSON encoded data of what we're looking at here. And then the server is what I wanted to show. So let's look at the server now. So server has its own URL, you can see. So this is the URL that we're going to be sending a request to now. It's got its own config and it's got its own client, which we will use basically. So if you go and do the client, so the client comes from the server and we defer it, and now we're going to get files. Let's just hit the continue. So we're now inside get files, and we can see that the URL that's being constructed here is not GitHub's API anymore, but it's the actual local server address. And then now if you go and look at the common request, and let's look at the body, we're going to see that the body obviously is JSON encoded now, but as we go forward and we actually call the JSON unmercial, our files property in here is going to match whatever we passed in, right? So if we expand this, you see that we've got only one item, and in that one item we've got a file name main.go. So now I come out of my source function, and now I'm going to be doing the assert, which is basically going to be checking main.go against this files variable within the unit test, right? So if I expand files variable in here, it's the exact same thing as the return output of the source code. So we know that the test will pass, so I'll just go ahead and click continue, and it says it's passed. So simple as that. But debugging is so useful. Like if you don't know how to test something, or if you're trying to mock something for the first time, it is so useful to have this utility, right? If you've been watching this series and, like, I know there's quite a lot that I've been going through in here. It could be overwhelming depending on your background. But if there's anything that I hope somebody can take in from here is the importance of debugging and how to actually debug Go application, at least through VS Code, because it is so useful, and I think it is so underestimated, the skill of debugging and the importance of being able to debug to troubleshoot things, right? And it's not just relevant for software developers, platform engineers, Gen AI engineers, we all need it, right? Now that we've got it, we're actually going to be setting up a test for our post function as well, which is slightly different, but similar idea with it. So with the post comment function. A lot of it is the same, so let's go ahead and actually start doing it. So let's go and say fun. Again, I'm going to give some descriptive name here, say test post comment, and I'm going to be passing in the testing t type, and in the body we're going to be doing something. So in here we don't really need any mock response to return as such, right? It's post, because we are creating or passing in the response from the LLM to GitHub pull request as a comment. We are not really getting any data back here. However, in this case, we're just going to be testing whether the request has been successful or not. Like, we're going to be looking at the return of the status code from the response from the post request and see if it's 201 or not. If it's 201, we know it's passed, basically. But as I said that, if you look at the post comment, you'll see that currently we're not even returning anything. So let's go and update this slightly so that we're returning the status code from the response of the post, right? So we know it's going to be an int, because status codes are always an int. We know we're going to return an error because of Golang's functionality and how it's set up. So as you can see, the status code here, I'm working with or comparing it in integer. So we're going to just return 0, and so we can't use nil when it comes to integer, just like strings. So we have to use some sort of integer. So we're returning 0. Same we'll do here, 0 and error, and lastly we're just going to do return resp dot status code and nil. Now we don't necessarily actually have to get the return of this function and store it into variables. We don't really need to in the source code. However, for the test to actually check against something or assert against something, we could use it there. So this one is actually going to be a bit shorter. We'll copy paste this stuff from here and modify it a bit slightly. Now I'm going to be covering, if there is interest in it from the community, I'm going to be doing a video in the future going over some more best practices, just focusing on writing unit tests in Golang. So if you're coming from different language frameworks, like let's say working with Jest, if you're with JavaScript, or if you're working with Mockito in Java or PyTest in Python, right? You'll already be familiar with capabilities such as parameterized tests, for example, or using a fixture or some sort of way to dynamically reuse test function or pass in a load of different parameters to it. You can do similar stuff with Golang as well. Obviously, this application doesn't really require for that many use cases. We could artificially create some here, but again, I would address all these in a future video. Again, if there is interest from the community on a video like that, focused on unit test. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that we don't really need to copy paste all of this. You could optimize it quite a lot. There are libraries and tools out there to use within Golang as well for this. So here we're not going to be writing any mock response, but instead we're just going to be making sure that the response is coming back with a 201 status code, because that's what is usually used when something gets created by a post. And for that we use this write header function, and basically it just provides it just sends a header with the provided status code. That's all it does, and that's what is then going to be populating the resp.status code property that we've got in the post comment function. And we have to make sure that, let's do a diff for as well, so that we ensure server is closed, not client, maybe it's closed. And we are just going to do resp, again, just skipping the error, and we're just going to do post comment, not private server.url, and let's just copy some of this in here. And so let's pass in the client. So we need the full name, we need the PR number, we need the token, we need the writer, we're missing the comment. So the comment, which is usually going to be the response from the LLM, we're just going to pass in a simple string saying LLM response. And we are then going to be performing an assert, similar to previously. In the previous test, we're just going to be doing passing in the T. This is our expected status code, and this is the actual status code that we're getting back, right? Let's go ahead and run this test. If I were to debug it, you could just follow the same process that I showed previously. And you can see that passes too. Cool. So this is how you write unit test, and also just to highlight another thing, you can see how my test function could easily discover the actual source functions. Now it can, because I'm in the same package. If I did something like webhook underscore test, then I would have to actually do something like webhook dot, right? This get files. It's just got, you basically see, as you can see here, it's not recognized anymore. So if I do webhook dot and do, right? And if I just do import it here, so github.com /github-bot /webhook. One second. We're going to main.go. Should just be that. Copy this over. But yeah, here we go. There we are with the unit test. And now the next thing we're going to be doing is that we're going to be creating a Docker file, and then actually going through how we can set up this Docker file and containerize it and run it from a Docker container. And I'll also go through some of the best practices when it comes to containerizing a Go application.